So I'll start off with the question that I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing. You've worked 25 years as an MP, took some time off, and now you're back. Why are you back?
Why am I back? I'm back really for two main reasons. One is the climate crisis and just a huge sense of concern about what the reality is after the IPCC report, what our obligation is to our kids and our grandchildren, and if I can make a difference on that issue, obviously I want to do that. And the other big one is inequality, growing inequality. I've been in Europe for the last decade, working internationally, came back home, and when I look at what's happening in my community and in my country, and globally, and I see the growing gap between the rich and everybody else, and I see the growing extent of corporate power and greed and how that's influencing ordinary people. Affordability obviously is a huge issue. Housing in this community, it's absolutely outrageous what's happening there, the failure of the market. If I can take on some of those issues, I was battling away back 25 years ago on some of the housing issues when we were fighting the liberal cuts to the National Housing Strategy. That's why I'm back.
Nice. And this is good. You touched on I went and kind of did a little poll with a lot of my social media followers who are voters from the Lower Mainland especially, and there are three major issues that they said were the most important. This is anecdotal, but it was about 300 people participating in this poll. They said there was three main issues in this election. It was, can you guess what number one was?
I don't know. I mean, another big issue.
This is people my age, millennials.
Well, I mean, obviously, climate is really important. Electoral reform is obviously key. After the broken promise of 2015, it's an important issue. And in terms of the other issue, obviously, housing has got to be.
Those were actually the top three. So I'm glad that those are things that you care about, etc. So let's say, Jagmeet doesn't win the majority government, that the NDP does not form the majority government. I hope that they do. I think there's a...
I'm aiming for a really strong contingent of Democrat MPs. I mean,
no.
Government would be nice, but not likely.
Fair enough. So if you guys do form a minority government, what is the priorities that you guys would have in forming government?
Okay, if it's a minority government and the NDP and probably a few Greens as well, if we actually have the clout in that government to decide who is going to receive our support, there's a couple of key points. First of all, it won't be the Conservatives. Jagmeet Singh has been crystal clear on that.
Yeah.
So the question is then, if the Liberals want our support, what's our bottom line? And there are a couple of issues that we have said are bottom line issues. One of those issues is that the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project will not go ahead. Any government that we support has got to recognize that it's a project which is not only destructive in terms of our climate targets, but it also poses a grave threat to the safety, the health, the lives of people of this community. The tank farm, the tankers, the lack of respect for the Tsleil-Waututh people. So that's one bottom line. And the second bottom line, without any doubt, is we've got to make sure that Trudeau keeps the promise in 2019 that he broke the 2015 promise to change the electoral system, that the 2019 federal election will in fact be the last election on first past the post.
Well, that's music to my ears, because that is essentially what matters most to me. Is I want my vote to count, and I feel like I generally do vote strategically, and I know that a lot of my colleagues do as well. Okay, so right now this race is particularly interesting, and I know you probably are getting a lot of questions about the whole dog and pony show that is this riding's election, but can you just walk us through what happened this week and kind of your guys' reaction to that?
Well, yeah, it wasn't just a reaction. In fact, I was responsible for the events that ultimately led to Heather Leung being fired, dumped as a candidate by the Conservative Party by Andrew Scheer. What happened was we all knew for some time that Heather Leung was a deeply offensive and homophobic, transphobic candidate. She led the charge in 2011 against the school board, Burnaby School Board SOGI policies. So we all knew this. And frankly, I was astonished that she was green-lighted, that she was approved as a candidate by the Conservative Party. I thought she'd be a lot more comfortable with Max Bernier and the PPC. But what we saw this week, just this week for the first time, were a couple of videos. Videos which were absolutely appalling, in which she referred to perverted homosexual lifestyles, in which she talked about homosexuals recruiting our children, in which she supported conversion therapies. And that was just over the line. And I met with my campaign manager. I said, look, this woman has got to be taken out. And so I called a press conference on Friday morning and challenged Andrew Scheer to do the right thing, to dump her as a candidate, and that if he didn't do that, obviously his great lofty words about respecting all Canadians, including LGBTQ Canadians, were false. And within hours, she was dumped, and we no longer have an official Conservative candidate. We've still got a candidate who uses the signs that say Conservative, who says she's going to run as an independent, but at least she's gone as a Conservative candidate, and I'm really pleased with this. I had support on that from both the Green Party candidate and the Liberal member of Parliament.
Nice. Were you surprised that the Conservatives were able to take that measure? That they took that measure?
I wasn't surprised at all. They had no choice. They had absolutely no choice. How could they leave a candidate who is spewing that kind of hatred and homophobia and transphobia? I mean, it would have been political suicide, frankly, for Andrew Scheer, who's already under attack for his positions on choice, on reproductive choice, and so on. And 3 days before an English language national debate, that's the last thing he needed. So no, I wasn't surprised. When I went into this, I was quite confident that she was dead meat.
So where do you think those votes are going to go? I know it's speculation.
It's so hard to know where the votes are going to go, but all I can say is that in the time, as soon as this story broke, I started hearing from Conservatives in Burnaby North, Seymour, saying, Svend, we're disgusted with our candidate, we're glad that she's gone, and we're supporting you. In fact, I just had a couple people come into my office a few hours ago saying they were big Conservative supporters, but they wanted to have a Svend Robinson sign on their properties. So.
Nice. Well, it's good to see that you're already fighting, not even in office, because it's nice to have a fight. I know we're running pretty close, so hopefully I can get some short answers here. So one thing,
No.
one thing is, this is like the weirdest shaped riding ever. It's one of these ridings that you can't even drive from one side to the other without crossing through other ridings. What is your thoughts on this riding existing in the space it does? And what do you think that there is a difference of voters' wants and needs on either side of this river?
Yeah. Two good questions. For 25 years, I represented the constituency of Burnaby and 3 different constituencies, and I was always able to fight back against the suggestion that there should be a riding that included Burnaby and the North Shore. This isn't the first time we've had this constituency. In fact, my first election I worked in was in a riding called Burnaby Seymour for a guy named Tommy Douglas back in 1968. So we had the riding before, but demographically, politically, sociologically, it makes no sense at all. They're very different communities. North Burnaby,
right,
very distinct from the North Shore, demographically and politically, and just serving the needs of the constituents on both sides of the water is challenging as well.
It definitely does seem challenging. Okay, the last quick line of questioning, in an election, mudslinging does happen. There has been some lobbing of negative energy. One of the things that is, for me as a voter, has been the harshest pill to swallow from the NDP is how much there is attacking of the Greens, etc. So what I would like is, have you met all the people that you're running against?
Of course.
Cool. I want to just ask you to say something nice about each of them and then maybe a critique, but keeping it somewhat civil. I know that, and if you have absolutely nothing nice to say about, you could skip. So starting with Terry, the guy who is currently holding the seat in this community, what's something you like about the guy?
Yeah, I mean, look, Terry Beach is, he works hard, and certainly he has communicated with his constituents. I think he's done a good job and an effective job of communicating with his constituents through newsletters and so on. So in terms of keeping in touch with his constituents, that's been a positive development.
Nice. What's maybe a critique of Terry's?
Where do I start?
I'm trying to keep this relatively local.
The biggest critique of Terry is that he betrayed the promise that he made to the people of this community in 2015 that around the Trans Mountain Pipeline, Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. He said that it would not go ahead unless the community agreed, unless Indigenous peoples agreed, and that they wouldn't use the Harper environmental assessment procedure. All of those promises were broken.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, Amita.
There's lots I like about Amita. I think she's great. She's incredibly dedicated. She's smart as a whip. And I think that, I hope that Canadian politics will find a really important role for her in the future. She, under a proportional representation system, it should be big enough that both Amita Kuttner and Svend Robinson can be represented in Parliament.
Yeah, I would like that. And something, a critique of Amita.
A critique of Amita. I think, I mean, and I'm trying to be charitable here, but I think she has perhaps a slightly inflated sense of her prospects in this election.
Okay, fair enough. And then Heather?
I have nothing good to say about her.
Okay. Maybe a critique of Heather?
Well, I mean, you know, she's a deeply offensive, homophobic person who has no place in representing the people of this community.
But how do you really feel? Okay, fair enough. Okay, and then
Rocky Dong. You haven't asked me about Rocky Dong.
I'm getting to that.
Okay, yeah.
It's interesting because, you know, as someone who's generally a little bit left-leaning, the idea of entertaining a People's Party candidate in this video, it could be controversial, but my God, Rocky Dong is such an interesting force. What is something you like about him?
I love his name. I mean, I think he could be a great porn star with that name, right? So, hey, go Rocky, go.
Something negative?
I mean, his views, for example, on immigration are deeply troubling, particularly given that he is an immigrant to Canada himself. And I would hope that he would recognize the incredible strength that immigrants bring to this country, and he hasn't done that, which is really unfortunate. But of course, he's running in a party led by Max Bernier, so it's no surprise.
Perfect. And one very last question.
This is the last one.
Yeah, I promise. Okay, so one thing that made me start to really want to look into you as a candidate to begin with was in January I saw an interview with you where you stood up and you were saying, I'll paraphrase it, but you can correct the record here, that you don't think that we should be doing any new oil and gas projects, and you specifically mentioned, through the interview, it was alluded that you weren't for fracking.
Right.
Your party hasn't really, from what I've seen, I haven't seen any of Jagmeet really coming out against the big LNG projects, especially in BC. Canada LNG is something that terrifies me. I have a 3-year-old son. I know what the evidence out there against fracking is. So how are you able to say something different than your party, and what is that dynamic like?
Well, look, if we're serious about the climate crisis, if we take seriously the warning of the IPCC, there can be no new oil and gas infrastructure. Full stop. We've got to move to a Green New Deal. And that means that we transition rapidly into renewables. It means, in my view, that there can be no federal government support whatsoever for the BC LNG project, and that means that we cut the subsidy. And Jagmeet Singh has been clear. He said we will cut all federal subsidies to fossil fuels. Well, that includes the BC LNG project.
But no banning of LNG.
Well, it's not a question of banning LNG. No subsidies, no federal support whatsoever. The provincial government is obviously still in a position to move forward on this, and we don't have any control over that. But what's the source of it? It's fracking. 100% opposed to fracking. And finally, and very importantly, if we're serious about respecting UNDRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the Supreme Court of Canada decision in Delgamuukw, this project can't go ahead because First Nations people, Indigenous peoples along the route, hereditary chiefs, have not given their consent. So it's wrong. Am I in a position to occasionally challenge my own party and the party leadership on issues? I've done it in the past, and I would do it again in the future on issues of fundamental principle.
I respect that. Whipped MPs is one of the things that bothers me the most of our system, and I like to think that you're an individual here, and I really appreciate you for your time. I know it's insane.
No, that's fine.
Craziness.
Yeah.
Thank
I'm
you.
hoping you get 100,000 views again, Joel.
Well, we'll see.